Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Saturday Week 3 main slate of college football DFS on DraftKings and FanDuel for Saturday, September 14th, 2024. Had to think about the date there for a second in my head. But yes, it is Week 3. We now have a 2-game sample size to go off of to know who's good, who's not good in college football, and more importantly, who to play and who not to play in college football DFS. So we are going to break down all 12 games here in the main slate for you, tell you what we expect out of each game environment, who you should play from each game, who you should consider for your lineups, and how to navigate ownership and stacking in the whole 9 yards. So a lot of information here in this episode. Please hit the like button if it helps you out here in any way. I really do appreciate it. The YouTube algorithm really only finds value in my videos if they get likes and comments. So please hit the like button. Share a comment, let me know what you think. I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. It helps the video get noticed, helps build the community, helps more people get better at college football DFS. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way you can be with us for the rest of the college football season, in addition to NFL season, golf season, college basketball season. We'll be covering all of that here at Mike's Money Picks. And if you're subscribed, you can be notified when new episodes drop, like our episode on the Saturday night slate, which will be dropping later this week. By the time this has dropped, our Thursday night video has already dropped, and our Friday video, if DraftKings ever puts up a slate for it, will be coming as well. So make sure you check those out in the channel feed on YouTube or in the channel feed on audio if that is how you are listening. But all right, let's go ahead and end the introduction there. We got 12 games to get to, and we don't have a whole lot of time. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so game number 1 of this slate is Memphis taking on Florida State in Tallahassee. And I got to say, this is a much closer projected game than I think it was at the start of the season, just because of how much FSU has free fallen. Currently, this game, according to ESPN Bet, FSU is 6.5-point favorites with a total of 52.5 points, meaning the projected score is about 30-23 in favor of FSU. I never round when I do my projected scores because you can't actually score 0.25 of a point in a college football game. So for Memphis, they're a pretty easy team to kind of navigate, but I think they're a little on the pricey side. Seth Hennigan is a low upside play to me. Like, we know he's going to attempt probably between 30 and 40 passes. He is not a guy who throws deep bombs down the field. He is not a guy who has a lot of rushing upside. So $8,000, that's an expensive price to pay for a guy whose ceiling is probably 28 fantasy points. So I'm probably just not there. If you want to play him in cash, I get it. This FSU defense has not looked good through 2 games. But I just don't think he gives you the upside necessary to win a GPP tournament here this week in Week 3. At the running back position, the good news is Memphis has a very clear starting running back. It's Mario Anderson. And FSU on their rushing defense has been terrible to start the season. They gave up 263 yards to Boston College, 190 against Georgia Tech. Both teams were over 5 yards per carry in those games. So if you believe that this FSU rush defense is genuinely bad, then Mario Anderson would be a way you could exploit that at a salary of only $6,200. You know he's going to be the one getting the carries. He is their workhorse back. Now, another thing that's interesting with that, though, is you could get kind of like the Clemson effect, where Clemson heard all week after getting walloped by Georgia about how bad they were and how their offense was terrible. And then what they go do against App State, they went out and dropped like a bajillion points, right? And obviously not a bajillion, which isn't even a real number. I'm a high school math teacher. I know that. But, pretty much they responded to all the criticism, right? FSU, after having a week off, hearing all the haters, everybody come after them, did they get better in that week off? I think there's a chance that happens. Just saying. But otherwise, I do think Mario Anderson Jr. on paper against a bad rush defense, on paper, a huge workload, $6,200, very solid play in my opinion. And then at the wide receiver spot, they've got 2 very clear starters at wide receiver. It's Rock Taylor and it's Demir Blankenship. They're okay. They're not going to break off big plays. They're not going to, give you these massive games because they do both split targets with each other. Both of them are the clear top 2 targets. Taylor has 12 targets so far this season. Blankenship has 10. Lanfear is going to play at tight end. Drake is going to play in the slot. But I just think Taylor and Blankenship, they're the clear 2 guys you want, and they're just too expensive at $6,500 and $6,200. Much like Hennigan, I don't think they give you GPP winning upside here on this slate. On the FSU side, DJ Uiagalelei has been dreadful so far this season, averaging 10.9 fantasy points per game against what is on paper 2 of the weaker defenses in the ACC. He just doesn't throw the ball down the field, which is kind of a problem when you need to score points. But FSU's projected 30 points in this game, according to Vegas. Somebody's got to score those 30 points. And DJU at a salary of only $7,500, I don't hate it. I'm going to be honest. I don't hate the play because we've seen him do it before at Clemson and at Oregon State. he's just got to start throwing the ball down the field. And, if this team's going to score 4 touchdowns, it's likely that he's going to account for 2, 3, maybe even all 4 of them. He's going to be in probably like I generally play a 20 max, right? He's probably going to be in one of those 20 lineups to me, just because if they score 30, he's going to have a decent day, right? At the running back spot, it's a committee between Roydale Williams and Lawrence Toafili. They're both fine players. They both actually not played poorly so far this season, in my opinion. They look like good running backs when they're out there, but it's a pure committee. And I have no desire to, pay for a pure committee for over $5,000 a running back for a team that is probably going to be pretty pass happy. So, if you want to take shots in GPPs, I don't mind it, but probably not how I'm getting there. Again, this team's projected to score 30 points. So if you're not a believer in DJU, you might want to give one of the 2 of them a shot. That wide receiver spot, none of them have been very good so far this year, but it's a clear starting 3 between Benson, Brown, and Douglas. If you're playing DJU, you probably want to stack them with 1, maybe even 2 of those guys. Again, the problem with the passing offense this season has been the lack of downfield throws. They're just playing very shallow, like not creating a whole lot of explosive plays. But if they do, it's going to come from one of those 3 guys, right? Now, game number 2 is a game that I am probably going to talk about a decent bit. Oklahoma State heading to Tulsa. Currently, Oklahoma State is 20-point favorites with a total of 62.5 points, thanks to our friends at ESPN Bet. This is the highest game total on the slate. The projection is Oklahoma State 41-21 as the final result, making Oklahoma State the highest projected team on the slate. So these are 2 offenses that I think make for great stacks. And here is why. So when you play a stack in DFS, right, it's kind of like making a string of bets. The first bet is, hey, when I'm playing a game stack or when I'm playing a team stack, it's that this team is going to score a lot of points or this game is going to have a lot of points scored, right? The next leg of the bet is who is going to be doing the scoring of those points. Last week, if you played a stack on Tennessee with Nico and Squirrel White and Chris Brazell, you got a ton of points out of Nico, but you didn't get a lot out of Squirrel White or Chris Brazell because Tennessee has such a wide array of targets in the passing game that they get the ball to that you're not guaranteed that one of those receivers is the one that's the beneficiary of all the Nico points. And so if you did play Nico, it would have been better off to play him with nobody because of the way that offense works, right? And then bet number 3 is what you get from the stack. And really, you need to either in DFS be getting leverage or salary from a stack. If you're playing a stack, one of the worst things you can do in DFS, in my opinion, is play a stack that is high owned and high cost because it is going to limit your options for building the rest of your lineup. It is going to force you on the same popular cheap plays as everybody else. And last year, there were a lot of people who, played Daniels, Neighbors, Thomas stacks and had duplicated lineups and weren't able to win any big money, even though those guys went off because it was expensive and it was popular, right? So how does that affect this game? Well, on the Oklahoma State side, this is one of the most condensed offenses in all of the FBS, and they run a very fast tempo, one of the highest rates at all the FBS. Alan Bowman is their quarterback. He is okay. He is serviceable. He scored 23 fantasy points in both games so far. He's going to have a ton of passing volume. This team is projected to score 41 points. He's a little bit pricey for my taste at 8,300, but I don't mind it as a play because of how condensed the receiver room is. Brennan Presley is the best one of all of them. He is a target monster. 19 targets last week against Arkansas, averaging 23 fantasy points so far this season. He's a great play. In my opinion, he's one of the best receiver plays on the slate. Then you've got Rashad Owens, who has a total of 12 targets on the season, averaging 14 fantasy points per game, getting the ball a decent bit, right? And then Deshaun Stribling, a total of 17 targets on the season, averaging 12 fantasy points per game, getting the ball quite a bit. So with Bowman, you know who to stack him with. It's one of those 3 guys, or maybe 2 of those 3 guys, right? It's very clear options. And then if it's not one of them, oh, by the way, they have one of the best running backs in the country, Ollie Gordon II, top running back option in the slate, one of the top running backs in all the land, in my opinion. He's priced at $10,000, but he's good. He's generally worth every penny. He was a little bit of a disappointment against Arkansas, only putting up 16.9 fantasy points. But the bottom line is this. If you're looking to stack this team or this game, it's very clear options. It's either Bowman and 1 or 2 of 3 wide receivers, not 5 or 6 or 7, or it's Ollie Gordon. Take your pick if you want to play this Oklahoma State side. On the Tulsa side, it's very interesting because you have Kirk Francis, one of the cheapest starting quarterbacks on the slate at $6,000, and he gets to go up against an Oklahoma State defense that gave up 20-plus fantasy points to South Dakota State's quarterback, 30-plus fantasy points to Taylon Green, Arkansas's quarterback. So this is a team that's given up a lot of points through the air. Because of the tempo they play at, Oklahoma State tends to give up good fantasy performances to the opposing team because the opposing team gets off more plays. And Kirk Francis at a salary of only $6,000, I think there's a pretty good chance that he has a pretty good game here in this one. And I don't mind it at $6,000. At the running back position, unfortunately, it's a committee, right? You've got, Watkins and Joyner. I'm sorry, not Watkins and Joyner. Watkins and Avant. Why did I have Joyner in my notes? Watkins and Avant are the two guys that are in this committee, and they're pretty much 50-50. Good luck figuring it out. I would personally just opt for to play the passing game on this side, but I do think that you could get looks at both of them, but unfortunately it's just a tough situation to figure out. But the best part of this with Tulsa is, like Oklahoma State, they're a super condensed passing offense. Camden Benjamin has been their guy so far this season. He had 11 targets last week against Arkansas State, 18 targets so far on the season, averaging 25 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's only $5,700, right? And the other receivers, Steptoe and Braylon Presley, the brother of Brennan Presley, are the other two starting wide receivers. And they have also been pretty solid so far to start this season. Braylon Presley going up against his former team in Oklahoma State, going up against his brother in Brennan Presley on Oklahoma State. There's a lot of motivation for him to play well this week. So I think that both Steptoe and Presley are options, which, by the way, great name, Zion Steptoe. Love it. All three of these receivers are great options here this week. And if you play a Tulsa stack, we talk about, does it gain you ownership? Does it gain you salary? It probably gains you both, because Francis and Benjamin is a very clear stack, very super condensed offense. We know who's going to be getting the ball type of stack, which is what we like. And it's also cheap, and it's also probably going to be pretty lowly owned, which allows you to get up to the higher plays. Possibly on the Oklahoma State side, you can get up to the quarterback Bowman and some of his receivers, or you can get up to the running back Gordon. In terms of how you set up stacks in college football DFS, this is one of the best games in order to set up stacks, in my opinion. Next up, we have Alabama taking on Wisconsin in game number 3. And currently, Alabama is 16-point favorites, total of 51.5, meaning that the projected final score is 32-16 in favor of Alabama. This is an interesting game. I just don't know about this one, man. I kind of think Wisconsin looked poor on offense, but their defense has been okay. But Jalen Milroe, they haven't played a guy like Jalen Milroe yet. Jalen Milroe is one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, one of the best fantasy options at the quarterback position in the nation. In my opinion, he's a top overall quarterback on the slate. If you just ask me, hey, Mike, what quarterback at the end of the slate is going to have the most points? My bet would be on Jalen Milroe. He's priced like it up at $10,000. He is averaging over 30 fantasy points a game. We like to get 3x value from our quarterback position. So at a salary of $10,000, you need 30 fantasy points at least to give a GPP winning viable score. And he can do that, right? We've seen him do that time and time again over the last 2 years. And if you're going to get exposure to this Alabama offense, that is how I would rather do it, because the running back position, it's the word of the day. It's a committee between Justice Haynes and Jam Miller. They're splitting the carries almost 50-50. And good luck figuring out the situation between them two. The reason why I hate running back committees so much is because if you're sitting there thinking, oh, this run game is going to be successful this week, I'm going to play, a guy from this run game. Well, then you pretty much have to play double the lineups if you want to get the same lineups for Haynes and the same lineups for Miller. Either that, or you're just missing out on other combinations because you're only playing them at half the ownership that you want them, right? Either that, or you have to make a stand on one or the other, and you can end up being wrong because there's very little indication on which one's going to be the right play. So I don't like playing running back committees in DFS, and I kind of just went over why. So if I'm playing this Bama side, it's going to be with Milroe. And here's the downside. This is one of those where we talked about earlier where there's a wide array of stacking options with Milroe. First off, he's a mobile quarterback. He could run for 3 touchdowns in this game, and there could be no wide receiver that gives you good value. If there was, there's a lot of options that can. Kobe Prentice is the guy who's been there for Alabama. He scored a touchdown against USF. I think he's a little overpriced. Jeremy Bernard is the Wisconsin transfer who I have been high on throughout the offseason in best ball and at the start of the season. I think he will eventually grow to be the guy at 5,900. And then, oh, by the way, you have the super talented true freshman Ryan Williams, who's been the most productive receiver so far for them this season, scored 3 touchdowns, all of which have been long, and is sitting there at $5,600, right? So do you bank on the guys who have been there like Prentice or Law, who you know are going to play snaps? Do you bank on the guy that I think is the best player out of all of them, and Jeremy Bernard? Or do you bank on the big play freshman Ryan Williams? Or do you just play Milroe unstacked? This is one of those that has such a wide array of outcomes that as much as I love Milroe, it's going to be difficult to figure out what to do with him in terms of whether or not to stack him this week for me. That's a decision that I'm going to have to make over the next 3 days. On the Wisconsin side, it's hard to get excited about Tyler Van Dyke. He hasn't looked good so far against either Western Michigan or South Dakota. I believe that was South Dakota that they played. He's just not in play for me, right? Like, he's super expensive. Going up against Alabama, hasn't been good so far. Pass. Just pass. Now, one thing I will say, in DFS, sometimes a bad play can become a good play when nobody plays him and the guy goes off. I don't see there being a big likelihood for Tyler Van Dyke to go off in this game, personally. At the running back position, I am a little bit interested in Ches Malusi because Tui Walker, who is the second running back, has kind of been, the second guy in a committee. He missed the game against South Dakota. He might miss this game. If he is out, Malusi has a path to a workhorse opportunity at a salary of $7,200. He's a little expensive, but I do think he could be worth it if he is getting the lion's share of the carries. At the wide receiver position for Wisconsin, this is one where it is really easy to stack. So, like, if you're playing a Milroe stack and you want this game to shoot out or you think this game stays close, it'd be kind of easy to find a skill player on Wisconsin to play. You can just play Ches Malusi, or at the wide receiver position, you can play Will Pauling, who is a target machine, had 7 targets against Western Michigan, was also the target leader against South Dakota when the starters were in there. He's only $5,100, very reasonable price tag for Will Pauling, in my opinion. And then Bryson Green is kind of the beta in this receiver room. Not a bad option, not a bad pivot off of Pauling, in my opinion. But those would be the only 2 guys I would really personally consider from that Wisconsin receiver room. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we're going to continue with the next part of the slate. Now, before we get going again, I do want to remind you guys there are ways you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have on Twitter. I'm also recording this on Tuesday night. So if any of my opinions change before Saturday morning, or any information comes out before Saturday morning, I try to tweet it out and get it out there to you guys. But I'm also more than happy to answer any questions if you reach out to me. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description. Fantasy Corner Discord has a lot of really smart, really good people who play DFS for a lot of different sports. College football is one of them. We've had some people in the chat make some money so far this season. And so if you want people to talk about DFS with, specifically college football DFS, you want people to talk strategies, plays with, or just sweat it out together, it's a great place to be, great place to hang out. And I very much enjoy being a part of it, and really recommend it if you're looking for more people to talk DFS with. And once college basketball season gets going, by the way, it gets really jumping in there. We've got a lot of guys who are really serious about college basketball DFS in there. It's a great place to be. And then lastly, I do write an article on my Patreon every single college football slate, including the midweek slates, where I profile my core plays as well as the reasons why they're my core plays. Now, I'm not going to sit here and guarantee that you're going to win thousands of dollars just playing my guys, but I can guarantee that you're going to get a well thought out, sound process with an explanation on who I'm playing and why, and it can help you get better at your process, help you get better at college football DFS. Also, proud to announce, I announced this last week if you missed it, I am now writing a weekly article for drroto.com for their all-access subscribers, where I talk about the top plays on the Saturday main slate. So drroto.com, great place to go for all sports, and I'm going to be contributing to them for college football this season. Really excited about it, really happy to get my content out there to more people. All right, now let's go ahead and continue on with game number 4, which is the game day game. LSU taking on South Carolina. I think that's kind of a commentary as to how weak this Saturday is, that LSU South Carolina is the game day game. Really, if you look at the night slate, it doesn't get a whole lot better. Like, where were they going to go? Wake Forest, Ole Miss, Colorado State. Like, it's not a great slate of games this week, y'all. Anyway, we got LSU taking on South Carolina. LSU 7-point favorites. The total is 50.5 points. The projection is 29-22 in favor of LSU, the road team, 7-point favorite. On the LSU side, we got Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback, which is interesting. He's very expensive at $9,100, and he doesn't give you any rushing upside. Personally, it's really tough for me to play a quarterback that's really expensive and doesn't give rushing upside. I generally don't like doing it. You've heard me take this rant about Shedeur Sanders before, but it's not a bad matchup. against South Carolina. You know he's going to have a ton of passing volume because this team hates running the football. And he's got good receivers to stack up with, and I don't think a whole lot of people are going to opt to play him. So you got a great combination of decent matchup, good quarterback, good offense, good stacking partners, not bad ownership. I'm kind of here for it. I don't think he's the best quarterback play on the slate, but he's going to make my lineups. At the running back position for LSU, it's a committee, and they hate to run the football, but Caleb Jackson would be the guy I would want. I just think he's the best out of all of them from everything I have seen. He's $4,800. Now, the South Carolina really shut down the run and the pass of Kentucky this past weekend, so I don't think this is the best matchup play. But $4,800 for a running back on a good offense, who's to say he just doesn't punch in 2 or 3 touchdowns? I think there's a chance that happens. So, again, he's going to make my player pool. Probably not a whole lot of him, but he's going to make my player pool. Then at the wide receiver spot, so Kyron Lacey has been the big target guy so far this year. 9 targets against Nicholls State, had a lot of targets against USC as well. I don't have the exact number in my notes. So pretty much he's been the guy in this passing game, right? Scored 4 touchdowns so far, averaging 26 fantasy points per game. The problem is he's expensive. And the other problem is that a whole wrench could be thrown into this LSU passing game if Chris Hilton Jr. ends up coming back. He is yet to play this season. He's listed as day-to-day on their official injury report. If he plays, he sure throws a wrench into things. I don't know if Lacey is still the volume hog that he has been if Chris Hilton is in the lineup. I certainly think it affects CJ Daniels' fantasy projection. I certainly think it affects Xavier Thomas's fantasy projection. I certainly think it affects Aaron Anderson's fantasy projection. So really, Hilton throws a wrench into things. If Hilton is out, I think you can continue to expect Lacey to be a volume guy and Daniels, Thomas, and Anderson to play a lot of snaps. If Hilton is back, I don't really know what to expect from this passing attack. You do have Mason Taylor at tight end, though. Look, if you were forced to play a tight end, I think he's one of the best tight end options out there. But unfortunately, DraftKings and Vandal, you only have to play receivers now. So I don't think he's a great option for his price. I think there's better out there, but he is a factor in this LSU passing attack. On the South Carolina side, you've got a cheap starting quarterback in Lenoris Sellers. He is mobile. That we do know about Lenoris Sellers, but he hasn't had a whole lot of success passing the football this year. I actually had the under on him at passing yards at 162 against Kentucky. Just barely squeaked that one out because he had 159. I don't really know what to make of him. The LSU defense, I'm not a believer in. Historically, just the past 2 years, they've been really bad. So maybe $6,200. Could he catch lightning in a bottle? Yeah, but he hasn't been good. And I try not to bash college kids on here. I try not to be like super critical and say like the guy sucks or anything. But I think objectively, I think he would agree with me. Lenoris Sellers has not been great so far this season, has not played all that well. So if he has a good game, it would come against this LSU defense. I don't think he's a terrible play at $6,200. At the running back position, it's a one-man show. It's Rocket Sanders, and he's been decent so far this year. Not big in terms of yards per carry, not breaking off explosive runs, but he's getting a ton of volume. And like I said, this LSU defense is not great. So if you're looking for a guy who can put up fancy points against the not great defense, that would be your guy. Lenoris Sellers can be played unstacked because he is a mobile guy. He is not a big-time, passing volume guy. But if you're looking to play one, I think Jared Brown of South Carolina would be your guy, your stacking partner. He's a former transfer from Coastal Carolina. He was one of their best players there. They got him the ball in all kinds of creative ways. And South Carolina started to do that against Kentucky. 4 catches, 50 yards, and a rushing attempt for an additional 11. I don't think he's an awful play. 5,500 is a little pricey. I think there's better points per dollar wide receivers out there. But if you're looking for a stacking partner with Sellers, that would be your guy, in my opinion. And then what's interesting is that the next supposedly 2 best receivers in this offense, Nick Harbor, the cheat code on CFB 25, and Gage Larvadain, the MAC transfer, they haven't done anything so far this season. So I really don't know what to make of this passing attack outside of Jared Brown. So far, Bennett has been their leading receiver, but he's $4,200. I don't know if that's going to continue. You can avoid this passing attack altogether if you want, but just kind of get into the options out there if you wanted to go after it, because I do think LSU is a poor defense. Next up, we have Boston College taking on Missouri. This game has a chance to be the shootout of the slate, in my opinion. I think this could be the game where you're watching the game on Saturday, or you're watching your quad box on YouTube TV, and you see the score pop up, and it's like, what's going on in that game? I think this has the chance to be that game. These are two offenses that can put up points in a hurry. The current spread is Missouri minus 17. The projected total is 53.5, meaning Missouri is projected to win this game about 35-18. But Boston College has a guy who can catch lightning in a bottle, and that is Thomas Castellanos. He is a mobile quarterback who can really run. He's really fast, really athletic. He throws deep down the field as well, which is what we like in fantasy. $7,800 for a dual threat quarterback going up against a bad defense who Missouri, their offense plays very fast. So you tend to get a lot of plays when you play Missouri. I think this is a pretty good spot for Castellanos, in all honesty. At the running back spot, it's another committee. You got Kai Robichaux and Trayshawn Ward. My vote would go to Ward. He's been slightly better this season in terms of yards per carry, in terms of production in the receiving game. And really, in a PPR format like DraftKings, receiving production is a cheat code. So when in doubt, I'm going to go with the guy who's getting receiving work over the guy who's not. At the wide receiver spot, it's a very clear stacking partner, and I don't think you have to stack Castellanos because he is that mobile, but Lewis Bond would be the guy. He was the number one receiver last year. He'll continue to be the number one receiver this year. Super affordable price, $4,800. So he's a stacking partner who actually gives you more salary for the rest of your lineup, which is not usually the case. Jaron Bradley is another guy that I would look out for. He's a Texas Tech transfer. I think he's a decent player, just hasn't really caught on yet, but I do think he can eventually become a factor in this passing game. On the Missouri side, Brady Cook is the starting quarterback. He is a really solid player, dual threat, can do a lot. I like Brady Cook a lot personally. Hasn't really had to do a whole lot yet in the season just because of their opponents. This one will be a little more of a test. I think he'll be out there for 4 quarters. I think he's a really solid option at $8,500. The running back spot, it's the word of the day again, y'all. It's a committee. Marcus Carroll, 18 carries so far this season. Nate Noel, 23 carries so far this season. It's pretty close to 50-50. Don't yet know what they're going to do in terms of who is the guy in this backfield. Carroll's a little smaller, has a little more wiggle. Noel's a little bigger, has a little more thump. I think it's just going to be situationally. Some games are going to be Carroll games. Some games are going to be Noel games. We're yet to really know a rhyme or reason or pattern as to when that's going to be. At the wide receiver spot, Luther Burden, in my opinion, the best wide receiver in the country, is questionable for this game with an illness. I think he plays, but does that mean he's 100%? I don't know. $9,000 is a lot to play for a guy who might not be 100%, but if he is 100%, he's worth every penny, in my opinion. If he were not to play or he were not to be 100%, Theo Weiss would be the very clear pivot. That's the good news, is that if Burden is out, which he very well could be, then the clear pivot is Theo Weiss. They're really the only two guys in this passing game that really matter. They're the only two I'm really considering for my lineups. Next up, we have Tulane taking on Oklahoma. And this is an interesting one. Oklahoma is currently 14-point favorites with a total of 47.5, meaning the projected total is about 31-17 in favor of Oklahoma. Let's talk about Tulane. So you guys remember at the start where I talked about for a stack, we want a team to have a pretty good shot at success, right? We want there to be very clear stacking options in a condensed offense, and we want there to be either ownership or salary that we get from the stack. Tulane is a stack that checks a lot of those boxes. Darian Mensah at $6,100 had a really good game against Kansas State, 21 fancy points, threw for over 300 yards, and he made some throws, man. Like I've seen. I didn't get to watch the game. I was at my daughter's birthday party. We established that last week that I was at my daughter's first birthday party for the noon kind of wave last week. I got to go home, watch the last quarter of the Texas game, which was super stress-free viewing. Loved it. But I ended up getting to watch most of these games from highlights on Twitter. And Darian Mensah made some throws. I think there's some talent there. I think there's something here with this guy. Oklahoma's defense is not great. He's at an affordable price tag. I think there's a chance he gets 300 yards in this game. He's a pretty good play, in my opinion. At the running back spot, we know who it's going to be for Tulane. It's going to be Mekhi Hughes. He was their workhorse last year. He's going to be their workhorse this year. Against Kansas State, 21 carries, and that was a game that was very close all the way down the stretch. He also caught 5 passes in that game. Very, very good play at $6,000, in my opinion. And then at the wide receiver spot, they really only throw to one guy, and that's Mario Williams. Has over 120 receiving yards in both games so far this season, is yet to score a touchdown somehow. So he's only at $6,000 because his average fantasy points per game is only 21.3. Just imagine if he caught a touchdown, it'd be 24.3, right? So he's a really solid option, in my opinion. He's really the only guy they throw to. Fleming is a guy that gets a little bit of work. The tight end Bauman is a guy that gets a little bit of work, but Williams is the guy in this passing attack. And so you can have a Mensa Williams stack, and you know that there's going to be a lot of balls thrown his way. If Tulane ends up trailing in this game and having to throw, there's going to be a ton of passing volume. I really like that little skinny Tulane stack personally. On the Oklahoma side, they got Jackson Arnold as their starting quarterback, and I don't know, man. I just think he's too expensive. He hasn't shown the rushing upside that I thought he would have. He put up all kinds of rushing numbers in high school, just really good looking athlete in high school, and it hasn't translated to the college game yet. And he hasn't thrown the ball very well yet either. I don't quite get why he's up here at 9,700. Now his team is projected to score 31 points, so that's 4 touchdowns and a field goal. If he accounts for 4 touchdowns, he's probably going to hit value, but I just don't see the 50-point Jackson Arnold game in him, and so he's kind of a pass for me. I'd rather pay up for Milroe. At the running back spot, we thought Gavin Sawchuk was going to be the guy coming into the season. He has not been yet. Javonte Barnes has outcarried him. Taylor Tatum has also been a factor as well. So is it Sawchuk's time? I don't know. Tulane got ran on a lot last week by DJ Giddens of Kansas State. Sawchuk is a big play waiting to happen. I don't think there's anything statistically that points to Sawchuk having a big game in this one, given how they've used him in the first 2 games. But like we said at the top of the show, sometimes in DFS, a bad play becomes a good play if nobody's playing him. And all Sawchuk would take is 1 or 2 long runs to pay off his price tag. He's going to be in my player pool, but he's not going to be very highly owned for me. I just think a guy with his profile, his explosiveness, eventually there's going to be a big game, and it could be this week. And I want to be there when it happens before everybody else does. At the wide receiver spot, Nick Anderson's still questionable. Jalil Farouk is out this week. Deion Burks has the chance to be a big-time volume guy. He had 11 targets against Houston, had double-digit targets against Temple as well. And if he's going to be a volume guy, he's going to be a solid play. And I don't think you have to stack him with Jackson Arnold. I think he can stand on his own, because if he's the only guy catching passes, it takes a whole lot less to score a lot of fantasy points as a wide receiver that way than to score fantasy points as a quarterback that way. If Anderson is back, he's a red zone threat for them. I think he definitely ups their passing attack, but I don't know. I'm not that interested in anybody in this passing game outside of Burks. Bauer Sharp is the tight end. Jake Roberts had a touchdown against Houston, but it kind of came out of nowhere. So I don't know. I really think it's Burks or bust in this passing attack. Next up, we have got Nevada taking on Minnesota. This analysis is not going to take long because this is a ugly game environment. I don't know why this got included on the main slate. Minnesota's 16.5-point favorites with a total of 43.5, meaning the projection is about 30-14 in favor of the Golden Gophers. For Nevada, Brendan Lewis has been great so far this season, but he's played poor defenses, if I'm being honest. He's ran the ball quite a lot. I don't expect him to continue this run because of the terrible game environment up against very slow, very good defensive team in Minnesota. He's a pass for me. At the running back spot, Sean Dowers did not get a carry last week. That is not reflected in the DraftKings salary. It was Savion Red and then Pat Garwo against Georgia Southern, and they were okay. But this game, you got a slow game environment against a good defense. It's probably a pass. Updating you on the Nevada receiving core, Braham and Smith are the very clear 2 top targets. They're cheap. Maybe you could play one, but not a great game environment. On the Minnesota side, Max Brosmer is their starting quarterback. And look, I really would be all over Brosmer if he was 5,900. But he's 7,500. You need multiple touchdowns out of him to hit value. This team is projected to score 30 points in this game. So could it happen? Yes, but this is just not a super high volume passing attack. Probably a pass for me. I would much rather, the only guy in this game that I think is locked to make my player pool is Darius Taylor of Minnesota. He missed the Carolina game due to injury. Played against Rhode Island, was pretty good. He's going to continue to be pretty good. He's a workhorse running back who is very good at football. Only $6,200. I think that is a misprice. He was drafted in the offseason in best ball drafts, up there ahead of Jordan James, ahead of Ches Malusi, and they're $1,000 more expensive than him on this slate. So I really think he's a pretty solid play. He's probably going to be my main exposure to this game. And then at the wide receiver spot, I think you can play Daniel Jackson as a one-off. He is a big-time target guy from Minnesota. Hasn't been great so far this season because he hasn't scored a touchdown. But if they're going to score 4, he might get one. $5,900, I don't think that's unreasonable. Next up, we have Oregon taking on Oregon State. This is an interesting one because it used to be a conference clash, and now it is not. Oregon is currently 16.5-point favorites with a total of 50.5, meaning the projected score is about 33-17 in favor of the Ducks. For Oregon, this is a interesting team because they've been kind of a disappointment the first two games, even though they've won both of them. I'm not interested in Dylan Gabriel. Really, with Oregon, their offensive line has been poor. And I haven't watched every minute of every game, but to me, the box score tells the story. When you look at their inability to score in the red zone, their inability to convert 3rd and short and 4th and short, their inability to keep Gabriel protected because he's getting sacked a lot, so much so that he has negative 38 rushing yards on the year, and he's a decently mobile quarterback. That's the red flag to me, is how this offensive line is played. And if the offensive line doesn't start playing better, then Gabriel's never going to be able to hit value for his salary of $9,900. Again, much like what I said with the other expensive quarterback, Jackson Arnold, I would rather pay up for Jalen Milroe than just play Dylan Gabriel. At the running back spot, Jordan James has kind of been the 1A to Noah Whittington's 1B. He's in a squeeze spot, right? Because pretty much everybody would either rather pay up for Ollie Gordon or pay down to the running backs who are much cheaper than him. If you're looking for a low-owned running back, Jordan James is going to be low-owned. I don't think he's a great play, but the ownership will certainly be low. At the wide receiver spot, you've had a big game from Tez Johnson in week 1 and then a big game from Evan Stewart in week 2. Good luck figuring it out. I'd be interested if both of them were cheaper, but given that, you might get a big game, you might not. I think they're too expensive. I'm going to pass on that unless I'm playing Gabriel, which, like I said, I don't think I'm going to be playing Gabriel. On the Oregon State side, their passing attack has been dreadful so far this season, and they haven't really played anybody all that good. Giovanni McCoy is the starter. He's attempted 35 total passes this season through 2 games. There's a lot of teams that would attempt that in 3/4 of football, so this is not great. This is not a high-volume passing attack. He is not worth $7,400 on DraftKings. At the running back spot, you've got Jim Griffin and Anthony Hankerson. This is a committee, but it's a committee that has been good for both running backs because both running backs have seen a ton of volume. Jam Griffin, 30 carries on the season. Anthony Hankerson, 40 carries on the season. This team runs the ball enough to support both of them. And Oregon just got ran on for 200-plus yards by Ashton Jeanty. So the question is the Oregon run defense actually bad, or is Jeanty actually that good? If you think the Oregon run defense is actually bad, Griffin and Hankerson are both in play, in my opinion, because they're both going to see probably 15 to 20 carries in this one. At the wide receiver spot, it's just bad for Oregon State. McCoy's only completed 24 passes so far this season. 8 of them have been to Trent Walker. If you're going to play any of them, Trent Walker's the guy at 4,400. Next up, we have Washington State taking on Washington. This is projected to be a little bit of a shootout, with Washington being 4.5-point favorites, total of 55.5 points. Meaning the projected score is about 30-25 in favor of the Huskies. For Washington State, John Mateer has had a heck of a start to the season, averaging 42 fantasy points per game, 48 and 36 so far, and he's done it with a lot of rushing upside. This is an offense that is going to operate at a high tempo and get off a ton of plays, and with him running and throwing, he's got a lot of upside. Yes, this is going to be the best defense he's played so far this season, but I still give him a pretty good chance to get to the 27 fantasy points you need to get 3x value. I like John Mateer a lot this week. At the running back spot, DraftKings doesn't have it priced right. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his first name, Schlenbaker, and Wayshawn Parker have been the top 2 backs this season in terms of volume and in terms of production, and they're priced down quite a bit. I don't mind taking shots at either of the 2 of them on this slate. At the wide receiver spot for Washington State, Kyle Williams has been the guy so far. He was not great against Texas Tech. He caught a pass for a touchdown, though, which kind of saved his fantasy day. He was really good against Portland State. But the other 2 starters are going to be Chris Hudson and Josh Meredith. I would kind of rather pay down for Hudson and Meredith than pay up for Williams, just because Williams, just to me, seems a little too expensive. I don't think his role in this offense is that far ahead of Hudson and Meredith that he should be priced that far ahead of them. But like I said, Mateer's a quarterback who's going to run, so I don't think you need to stack this offense with like a double stack or a triple stack or even a single stack. I think you can play Mateer and just Mateer if you wanted to. On the Washington side, they got Will Rogers at quarterback, and I think this is an overprice. Last year they had Michael Penix. He's not Michael Penix, and while this is a good matchup, I don't see the upside. It's a pass for me. At the running back spot, I do like Jonah Coleman a lot. He's getting a pretty big workload. He's been great so far this season. I topped 100 yards in both games. He's one of the best running back plays on the slate to me at $6,800. Then at the wide receiver spot, you've got a very clear top three for Washington. They've all three been good so far this season. That's the good news about a condensed passing offense, is that you don't need the quarterback to be this super prolific 500-yard passer to support 2 or 3 wide receivers when it's just those 2 or 3 wide receivers. In this case, Giles Jackson, Denzel Boston, and Jeremiah Hunter have all had good starts this season. Boston would get my preference just because I have liked his profile throughout the season so far. I was drafting him the most in best ball drafts. I think he's the guy that you want. I think he's going to be the guy that you want down the stretch of the season. But Jackson, Boston, and Hunter, to me, are all in play here on this slate. All right, let's take a quick breather, and then let's end it with the last 3 games. Reminder, if this video has helped you out in any way, please help me out. Hit the like button on YouTube, rate and review if you're listening on audio, hit the subscribe button. That way you can be with us for the rest of the college football season. I cannot stress enough how much that helps me out, and I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. All right, now, the next game up, we've got Texas A&M heading to the Swamp to take on the Gators. Currently, Texas A&M's 4-point favorites with a total of 47.5, meaning the projected total is about 26 to 22 in favor of the Aggies. For Texas A&M, Connor Weigman's kind of struggled. There's been much conversation about how he's not a great fit for Colin Klein's offense that tends to prefer mobile quarterbacks. And it's shown in fantasy, right? Like, he hasn't put up a ton of fantasy points so far this season. He hasn't had a ton of passing volume so far this season. He's a little expensive for my taste at $8,100. The good news is we saw this Florida defense get torched by Cam Ward in week 1. So if you think that Weigman and the Aggies can figure it out, this is not a bad spot to target him against, in my opinion. At the running back spot, you do have a workhorse in Le'Veon Moss. I don't think he's a poor play. Again, Florida got scored on in a myriad of ways in week 1. So it absolutely could be Le'Veon Moss who does it here this week. In a game of consequence that they played against Notre Dame, he had 20 carries. I think it's very likely he sees 20 carries here again in this one. Like the play quite a bit. And then at the wide receiver spot, Ja'Day Walker, it could potentially be injured. He only played 1 snap against McNeese, and then he was pulled. Apparently had some kind of injury, like a hand injury. The problem is that, and I don't say this to roast the guy or to encourage any hate towards the guy, but Texas A&M's beat writer does not do a good job of reporting injuries. Gamblers have gotten mad at him in the past for this, and he claps right back at them and has no sympathy at all. And so if there is any chance he misses this game, you're not going to get it from the beat report. You're not going to know until after kickoff. It happened one time last year with Le'Veon Moss. He reported that Le'Veon Moss was out at 12:08, which helped nobody. So pretty much if he is injured, you're not going to know that he's out until after lineups lock. I don't like the thought of that, in my opinion. Their number 1 receiver is Noah Thomas. He's really the only guy I would have interest in, but I don't think you have to target this passing offense, in my opinion. On the Florida side, they're a little more palatable in terms of an offense because they're pretty condensed. But the problem is that DJ Lagway and Graham Mertz are supposedly going to split snaps in this one. That is not good. It makes both of them unplayable and really limits your exposure to just the running backs and wide receivers, of which I do think you can play because Montrell Johnson is a pure workhorse. It scored 20 and 21 fantasy points so far this season. And against Miami, he still had 20.7 fantasy points. So in a big-time loss, he still managed to put up 20 fantasy points. To me, that keeps him in play. Yes, the Texas A&M defense is pretty good, but if he's going to see enough of a volume, he's going to score fantasy points. And then at the wide receiver spot, Eugene Wilson is just a big-time volume guy in this passing game. Had 8 targets against Samford, turned it into 29 fantasy points. Also saw 8 targets against Miami, turned it into 12 fantasy points. I don't think he's a bad option at $7,200. Would I prefer him to be cheaper? Yeah, but he's going to get the ball thrown his way, and there's not a lot of guys on this slate you can say that about. Other than that, the rest of the passing game has been kind of pedestrian. Elijah Badger had a good showing against Samford, but he was not great against Miami. Arliss Boardingham, the tight end, is kind of taking a while to come aboard. Kamir Deek, the Wisconsin transfer, hasn't done a whole lot. Really, it's Wilson or bust for me in this passing game. Next up, we have one of the best games on the slate to stack, in my opinion. West Virginia taking on Pitt. The backyard brawl is back. West Virginia is 2.5-point favorites with a total of 60.5 points. This is the second highest game total on the slate. The projected total is West Virginia 31-29 over Pitt. On the West Virginia side, Garrett Green is one of the best quarterback plays on the slate, in my opinion. He's only $7,800. He's a dual threat with a ton of upside, had multiple 40 fantasy point games last year, mostly thanks to his legs. And he wasn't great against Penn State, but how many guys are going to be great against Penn State? I'm willing to give him a pass for that. He got a little bit of a price decrease because of that, and I'm definitely going to be rolling him out at $7,800. I think he has one of the highest upsides on the slate of any quarterback. At the running back spot, it's that C word again, the committee between Jaheim White and C.J. Donaldson. The good news is that the committee matches exactly what we would expect from their profiles. Donaldson is going to get more volume and be decently efficient, but not break off explosive plays. Jaheim White is the guy who's going to get less volume, but is going to break off explosive plays. To me, White is the more high upside DFS play. Donaldson is the more low or high floor DFS play. So I would prefer to play White, but I don't think you have to play either of them if you don't want to. At the wide receiver spot, this is a mess for West Virginia. Honestly, they have a ton of guys who play snaps, ton of guys who get targets. The most consistent one's been the tight end Cole Taylor. He's only 4,100. Don't think he's a poor option. Hudson Clement had some big-time games for them last year, especially when paired with Garrett Green. He's only 4,800. To me, you got two cheap stacking partners there who have a lot of upside. And then Jaden Bray, I got to mention, he's an Oklahoma State transfer. I think he might be the most talented receiver in this room, but hasn't really shown it a whole lot on the field. Only one catch for 44 yards against Albany. And then Fox and Ray are both going to play snaps as well. Look, if you're looking to stack up Garrett Green, I think you can play him unstacked because he's that mobile, but Clement would be the high upside play. Taylor would be the high floor play. Fox, Ray, and Bray are all going to play snaps. If you're playing enough lineups, you can get to them. Now, on the Pitt side, Pitt's an interesting one because Pitt has actually played at the third fastest tempo in the nation so far through 2 games. What that means is that their games create a ton of plays, which creates a ton of opportunity for fantasy points. And a lot of them have been scored by Eli Holstein, their quarterback. He's been great through 2 games, over 27 fantasy points in both games. Now, this will be the best defense that he has played, but I think he can still put up 20-plus fantasy points. I do, and he's going to be in my player pool. I like him at $7,300. Really, this game is great, in my opinion. At the running back spot, you also have a workhorse, a profile that we love in Desmond Reed. He's been efficient, averaging over 7 yards per carry in both games so far this year, averaging 38 fantasy points so far this year. That's insane. And he's only $6,400. He's going to be popular. He should be popular. He's one of the best running back plays on the slate. And then at the wide receiver spot for Pitt. So last week, I got on here and I talked about how all 5 of their wide receivers were in play, starting at Mumfield, Williams, Johnson, Lee, and then the tight end Bartholomew. And then as the week went on, I'm like, you know what? Mumfield's the guy. I'm not going to let week 1 talk me out of that. And I should have played more Mumfield than I did. I did play him. He was my stacking partner, but I should have played even more of him. He had a big game week 2 against Cincinnati, 5 catches, 123 yards, 2 touchdowns, 32 fantasy points. Look, he's the guy in this passing attack. And while they run enough plays and they're condensed enough that Williams, Johnson, and Lee, they're all going to have their moments. They're all going to have their opportunities to score fantasy points. They're all going to have their games where they hit value and give you good GPP scores in DFS. Mumfield's the guy. And that's just the logic that I'm going to go with from here on out. To me, watching what I've seen of Pitt so far this season, he's the best one of all of them. He profiled as the best one of all of them. He's shown it now in 2 game sample size that he is the best one of all of them. He's my guy in this passing attack. I'm going to have a lot of Holstein Mumfield stacks this week. Last game of the slate, you got Notre Dame taking on Purdue, and this one is a pretty ugly game environment as well. The Irish are 10-point favorites with a total of 45.5, meaning that the projected total is about 28-18 in favor of Notre Dame. And look, on the Notre Dame side, Riley Leonard, I'll just say it, he's been bad. He was really bad against Northern Illinois. Just missed some throws, wasn't efficient, didn't do a lot on the ground, didn't lose a fumble, but he did fumble. I don't like how he's looked, but he's got upside, man. This is a guy who can run for a lot of yards at any given notice. He's very mobile. He's very athletic. I would rather play Garrett Green at a lower price, but I think in GPPs, you're going to get low ownership on Riley Leonard, and he does have that kind of upside to give you a good fantasy performance with his legs. However, if you don't want to play Riley Leonard, but you still want to get access to a Notre Dame team that's projected 28 points, Jeremiah Love is your guy. He has been the better of the 2 backs so far this season. He's more involved in the passing game. He's broken off more explosive plays, and he's scored more fantasy points, but yet he's cheaper. He's $5,700, whereas Jadarian Price is $6,900. I'm going to continue to play Jeremiah Love over Jadarian Price, and I am not going to regret it. I think he's a great play at $5,700. I would much rather have him between the other running backs. I really think he's a good price-adjusted running back. The wide receiver spot, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. Mitchell Evans, the starting tight end, isn't playing a full workload yet. Jordan Faison started game 1, missed game 2, might be back for this one. Greathouse and Mitchell, they don't play full-time. Collins kind of does play full-time, but we kind of know what he is. He's not going to be a super high volume guy. He's not going to be a big explosive play guy. He's a contested catch possession receiver guy, and $5,500, I think you can find better plays out there. This is just a mess, and I think if you're playing Riley Leonard, you can play him unstacked, and I would not play one of these wide receivers as a one-off play. For Purdue, they run an air raid offense, so you're going to see a ton of passing volume out of Hudson Card, but this Notre Dame passing defense is no joke. They made Connor Weigman look awful in week 1, and Northern Illinois really beat them on the ground, not through the air. I wouldn't play him, just personally. I think you can pass on him at $6,800. I think there's better options at lower prices. At the running back spot, again, Notre Dame's a pretty good run defense too. Maccabee is the guy I would prefer based off of the volume he's gotten so far this year. He's cheaper than Reggie Love, but I'm going to be passing on both. At the wide receiver spot, though, I am going to take some shots at Max Clare. He is their tight end. He is their leader in the passing game. He was their best pass catcher in week 1 against Indiana State. $3,400. Notre Dame, I think you can beat their passing defense, passing over the middle with a tight end, not playing out wide against the corners where they have to beat Benjamin Morrison and the rest of that crew. So I think that Max Clare is a pretty good option at $3,400. If you're looking for a punt, not a bad one. All right, very last portion of the show here. We did this last week and it got much acclaim. So we're going to talk about really quick starting a lineup. And we're going to start what I would consider would be the chalky lineup, right? So where do I think people are going to go at quarterback? So I think what people are going to do at quarterback, I think a lot of people are going to go with Jalen Milroe up top. And then I think at the super flex, I think you are going to see people go with, let's go with Eli Holstein. And then if we're playing Holstein, we should probably stack him with Mumpfield. Now, if I do that, my average remaining salary is a little over $5,300, so I have to get cheap. That's probably going to limit my access to the top running backs. So if I'm looking to get cheap, and I'm looking to still play a pretty good running back, let's see if there's anybody here that we got. There's nobody that really stands out personally. Not really anybody I'm feeling. At the wide receiver spot, though, I do think I can find some cheap plays. I can go with a guy like, I'm thinking here, we could make this a double stack with Eli Holstein, another one of the Pitt wide receivers. Let's go to the Tulsa game. Let's put Braylon Presley in here, $3,900. And then, you know what? Let's go to Tulane. Let's put Mario Williams in there at $6,000. Then we got $5,600 left. And I think that's going to be a pretty chalky start to our lineup. So that's a pretty good start. I wouldn't personally build all my lineups like that, though. I think that's what a lot of the field is going to do. So you're going to want to get different one way or another. But I think a lot of people are going to play Milroe. I think a lot of people are going to play Holstein and Mumpfield. I think a lot of people are going to play pieces from the Oklahoma State Tulsa game and the Pitt West Virginia game. So you can do that. Just find other ways to get different. Don't make it your entire lineup based off of it. But all right, y'all, that's going to do it for today's episode. So if you were helped by today's episode, please help me out. Please, hit the like button on YouTube, rate and review the audio if you are listening on audio. Really does help me out a ton. I cannot stress enough how much I appreciate it. And then also remember, you can get more from me by following me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks, joining the Fantasy Corner Discord, or hitting up the articles on the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. All right, but that's going to do it for this episode, y'all. We covered a lot of information in a decent amount of time. This went a little over time for what I thought, but that's okay. Anyway, that's all we got here for the week 3 main slate. Hopefully we gave you all the information to build some winning lineups. Make sure you come back for our videos on the night slate. Thursday night slate's already up. Friday night slate is coming. Saturday night slate is coming also. Make sure you're back for those. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys.